now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength. Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.
Damn, that shit was dope.
Welcome back. It's the Radical Maajid Nawaz for another live stream of Warrior Creed, and our brother Usman sends his apologies today. The infamous, he can't be here because he has been stricken with the illness that I had, the cold that I had last week, though I managed to somehow soldier on. It's quite a severe one. He's in, I think he's bedridden. So hopefully, as we say, inshallah, he'll join us next week. But we're going to carry on today just with my side of it, the presentation, because we're discussing this issue of excess deaths and how the governments around the world are seeking to conceal the situation, the news that is currently pretty much indisputable, that there are a 10 to 20% excess deaths when you compare rates between now and pre-COVID all around the world. This isn't just a UK, US phenomenon. It is all around the world. And that's why we've called the live stream today, Governments Hide Worldwide Increase in Post-Vaccine Excess Death. There is a correlation between the rollout of the vaccines and this global excess death rate. Remember, it is not just in the UK, US, but as we're about to demonstrate to you now, it is all around the world. Let's kick off with the Guardian UK headline, because the British Heart Foundation has issued a press release expressing their concern about this excess death rate. And in particular for the British Heart Foundation, they're worried about cardiovascular disease leading to excess death. Now, if we just stop there a second and think back to the days of yours truly being on LBC, it is a sad state of affairs that the British Heart Foundation, who are worried about an increase in cardiovascular related excess death in the UK, and issued a press release about this very issue. We were all warning them of this problem back then. And that's what they did to us. They rubbished us as conspiracy theorists and cancelled our voices. Unfortunately, now this trend in excess deaths is becoming apparent. Here's the Guardian headline. The Guardian reports, and you can see there, that's the 23rd of Jan, I believe it says there. I think that's correct, Monday. That should be the, Monday the 22nd of Jan. The Guardian, cardiovascular disease, early deaths, it says in the headline, in England at highest rate in more than a decade. Subheading, British Heart Foundation says its figures reveal the worst heart care crisis in living memory. I'm going to read to you an extract from that article. And here it is. And it says the premature deaths, reading from The Guardian, from cardiovascular disease have reached their highest rate in England for more than a decade, figures reveal. According to the British Heart Foundation, brackets BHF, which is its acronym, close brackets, the rate at which people under 75 died from heart problems was in decline before the COVID pandemic, although progress slowed between 2012 and 2019. Since 2020, however, the rate has risen. Oh, I wonder what happened in 2020. It carries on. The latest data from the charity shows that the premature death rate for cardiovascular disease in England reached 80 per 100,000 people in 2022. That is the highest since 2011, when the rate was 83 per 100,000 people, the BHF notes. The actual number of people dying prematurely of cardiovascular conditions, including heart attacks, coronary heart disease, and stroke, has reached the highest level since 2008, with more than 39,000 such deaths in 2022. So these are England figures. But as we've said to you, this isn't just a UK or US specific phenomenon. Even New Zealand, as you see here in an article dated 20th of February from the New Zealand Herald, And it states in the headline, New Zealand records biggest increase in registered deaths in 100 years. Going to read an article read from this article for you from the New Zealand Herald. And it states, New Zealand has recorded the largest increase in the number of registered deaths since the 1918 influenza pandemic. New data from New Zealand shows the births and death figures for the year ending December 2022 show there were 38,574 deaths in 2022, 10.4% more than in 2021. The reason I'm showing you an article from 2023, this is a New Zealand article from 2023, is, as you can see there, the date, February 23, just nearly a year ago, is because of the video you're going to see next. And that is because these excess death rates have been going on regularly in a steady increase since COVID. So now we're going to show you a video which shows from Our World in Data, Nurse Dr. John Campbell, PhD doctor, who gathered all of the excess death rates from around the world for now. And you're going to see why that New Zealand article from a year ago, why I showed it, because the trends are that from COVID all the way till now, you're going to see the graphs like this from multiple countries, the excess death rate in each country hovering around 20 to 10 to 20%, basically. This is Dr. John Campbell demonstrating that this is a global, a worldwide increase in death rates, a worldwide, and as of yet, unexplained by governments or globalists, excess death rate.
A warm welcome to today's talk, Monday the 22nd of January. Now, last night, the British Heart Foundation in the United Kingdom issued a press release about the, well, I would say alarming increase in cardiovascular deaths and heart deaths. I'm going to cover that in some detail shortly, but before we do that, we have to note that excess deaths are an international problem. This is not just the United Kingdom. Let's just have a look at some information from Our World in Data here. Now, here we see the United States, excess mortality, deaths from all causes in the United States, and we see it's been, well, it's just gone above the 10% mark, hasn't it? It's been 10 to 20% here, and what, 8% there now, about what, 11% in the United States. So excess deaths for a long time now in the United States, sadly. Moving on to Canada, and we see that the situation in Canada, well, for the last few months, the excess deaths have been round about the 15% mark, somewhat over the 15% mark. More deaths than we would expect based on 5-year averages. Really quite significant. Looking at Australia now, this is the graphic for Australia. Now, let's hope this is accurate from Australia, that it has gone down. But I suspect there could have been delays in data from Australia because, as you see, it has been very high. It's been around about the 20% mark. Really quite high excess deaths in Australia. We'll keep an eye on that, see if that is genuine. Let's hope it is, that the excess deaths in Australia are back down to a kind of a baseline. This is Ireland. And again, in Ireland, we've been between the 10 and 20% mark, around about 8% now, but fairly high, consistently 2021, 2022, 2023. Much higher excess deaths in all of these countries. New Zealand, let's look at New Zealand now. New Zealand, well, again, very similar to Ireland, really, 10 to 20%, peaking up at 30%, down to about 8% as of the latest data. But 10 to 20% is kind of the range it has been at. Netherlands, it's been, well, similar really, because remember that's the 20% line there for the Netherlands. So Netherlands still reasonably high, above 20% now, in fact, for excess deaths in the Netherlands. Now, I think the last one I put on is Japan, where the excess deaths here are really quite staggering and still rising consistently. So there we see it, well over 20% in Japan, and has been for some time. Very steady, linear increase in excess deaths in Japan. Now, we see this pattern of global excess deaths, and we're going to keep going on about it till we get some answers on this, because it's just an appalling situation. governments around the world are simply not answering the questions desired. And we're now going to look at the British Heart Foundation, a press release from overnight. Now,
So, folks, you tell me, what coincidentally do you think was rolled out around the world in around 2020 that could have had a knock-on effect to a point where by January 2024, there is a correlating pattern of 10 to 20% excess deaths worldwide? What could possibly have caused not just the excess deaths, one, but for them to be a global phenomenon, two, around the 10 to 20% range? In other words, some form of consistent factor involved that is leading them, by the graphs you saw all there that we just presented, to be floating reliably around the 10 to 20% range. That's three great big and quite unbelievable coincidences to happen to correlate at the same time. Now, we do know this. When the world all together, the governments of the world, run by treacherous globalists, decided to collaborate and conspire to lock us all down around the planet at the same time, we know that happened simultaneously, but we know why that happened now, because they were all via the World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum, via the compromat and blackmail that the Epstein files have revealed that leaders had on them. They were all coordinating to engage in what at the time we dubbed a global palace coup, to seek to usurp authority from within our societies without us realizing, under the guise of an emergency, so that we could be placed under their technocratic tyranny and our liberties further reduced to a point of absolutely nothing once the technocracy was in place. So we know what caused the coincidence of global lockdowns. We know that much. Now ask yourselves a question from everything you've just seen. Is it too far a stretch of the imagination, considering that everybody who warned about the deceit that was the global COVID scamdemic, and everybody who warned that this was an attempted soft coup or a palace coup, and everybody who warned then that this would have consequences, not just because the vaccines were untested, but because there was in fact malicious intent behind the people doing this. They didn't care whether or not these vaccines harmed you or not. And those voices that were warning of all of this, those voices that perhaps at the time suggested that the US elections themselves were interfered with so that the globalists' choice of candidate could come to power and continue the global palace coup. Is it not plausible that those voices that had been warning all of us about all of this, now, when they see those correlating patterns of excess death around the world, including the cardiovascular death that was specifically warned about, is it not plausible that those excess deaths you're seeing have been caused by vaccine harms, lockdown harms, and or indeed the end-of-life protocols using midazolam and morphine to kill off the elderly in our hospitals and care homes, pretending all the while that it was COVID that was killing them? Is it not possible that those are the reasons? The end-of-life protocols using midazolam and morphine, the vaccines causing cardiac arrest, and, of course, the knock-on effect from the lockdowns devastating the economy and causing all manner of poverty-related and social circumstance-related death as well. Those three factors, could they not possibly be playing a role in this global excess death? Well, if the governments got their way, you would never know, because instead of reporting it in that way, as we demonstrated in last week's Warrior Creed, instead what you're seeing is this. So here's another news report. This time, Spectator reports from the Wall Street Journal, stating, and you can see the date there, January the 11th, 2024. We put this slide in last week's live stream. We'll read it again for you. Just in, the Wall Street Journal reports that cancer is hitting more young people in the US and around the globe, baffling doctors, with diagnosis rates in the US in 2019 rising 12.8% compared with 2000. It's baffling doctors, apparently. The same doctors that were baffled back then when we said the harms of lockdown will exceed any stated or purported benefits of lockdown. The same doctors that were baffled back then when we, not a doctor, said that the COVID vaccine will not stop transmission and will not stop infection and will not stop you getting it nor giving it to transmitting it to other people. The same doctors were baffled then when we said it. Now they're baffled, just as they were baffled then as to what's causing this global excess death rate. Doctors are saying they're baffled. Could it be that they're baffled because the data that we've been pointing to that would once and for all conclusively prove what we already know is being or are being hidden deliberately from those who serve official quarters? And in that phrase, I include doctors, because remember, doctors and nurses are on the government. In the UK, at least, they're on the government payroll. In the US, they're relying on the health insurance companies. And therefore, there are a whole bunch of conditions and stipulations, including their medical licenses, that they fear losing if they speak out. But could it be that those doctors who do want data from official quarters, not from wacky so-called conspiracy theorists on alternative media, could it be those doctors are still baffled because that data is being deliberately hidden from them? As this week revealed in the UK House of Commons, our lower chamber in our Houses of Parliament, where Andrew Bridgen MP raised this very issue and stated that the MHRA, the Regulatory Authority for Medicines and Health, the MHRA, they admit that all this, the vaccines and the excess death data, has been released to Pfizer, AstraZeneca, and Moderna, yet they claim they cannot anonymize it and release it to the public. And Andrew Bridgen claimed in Parliament the failure to release this data makes it look like there is definitely something to hide. So doctors are stating they're baffled. Meanwhile, the government refuses to release the data that could potentially resolve this question for us, the data that would demonstrate correlation between the vaccine rollout and excess death. And they refuse to release this data. Meanwhile, they have released it to the vaccine companies themselves. Who does your government work for? Ask yourselves that question. Do they work for you? Because if they worked for you, they would give you this data. How is it that the extremely wealthy big pharmaceutical companies that make the vaccines have access to this data and you don't? Here is Andrew Bridgen in Parliament making this very point.
Co-chair of the Heart Group has been doggedly pursuing the UK Health Security Agency for their record-level data on dosage, dates and deaths for a year. This is the data that could sort out this issue once and for all. They admit they've got it. The MHRA admit that all this data has been released to Pfizer, AstraZeneca and Moderna. Yet they claim they cannot anonymise it for public release to the public. A failure to release this data makes it look like there is definitely something to hide. A recent poll in the USA shows that more than half of the public think the vaccines are responsible for a significant number of deaths. If there was nothing to hide, they would certainly release this data for analysis, anonymised, to stop the upswell of legitimate concern. The latest response from the Information Commissioner's office is that Dr. Claire Cray's got to wait another 6 months at least before a case officer will be assigned to this issue. This is not acceptable, Sir Gary. They've released our health data to Big Pharma, but they won't release it to us. The record data, level data must be released. It is really too much to ask. Is it really too much to ask that the British public be given the same level of access to the relevant data given to Big Pharma companies, those actually responsible for this debacle? Corporations that carefully secured immunity from all legal liability, or in this country, indemnity from the government before dangerously and negligently experimenting on the health of our nation and the world.
Now, with everything we now know about the lies behind COVID, the deleted WhatsApp messages, the affairs in Parliament while we were all locked down, Health Secretary Matt Hancock having an affair with Gina Codangelo, if that was her name, on CCTV in government offices. I mean, after everything that's been revealed, the PPE contracts given to pub landlord mates because of corruption, the way in which they fleeced the country during COVID, now refusing to release the data that would demonstrate the correlation between the vaccine rollout and this excess death rate, but instead giving that data to pharmaceutical companies. Are your suspicions not yet aroused? The Daily Skeptic reports on this news as well, concerning safety signals revealed by hidden Pfizer vaccine report. That's by Nick Hunton. The Daily Skeptic reported on the 20th of January, 2024. And indeed, one of the UK's most public cardiologists, Dr. Aseem Malhotra, is suspicious. He's posted a video of Bridgen's various interventions in Parliament. And as you can see here from his post, he's concerned. And he's quoted from Bridgen in that post: the COVID mRNA vaccine is top of the list in the hierarchy of causes of excess cardiovascular deaths until proven otherwise. Those that ignore these cold hard facts are either unaware of the evidence, willfully blind, or lack a conscience. So that's a quote from Bridgen's speech in Parliament, but it's been posted by one of the UK's most public and publicly outspoken cardiologists, Dr. Aseem Malhotra, who certainly does believe that the connection between excess deaths and vaccines is one that is necessary to make. Here is Andrew Bridgen in the clip that Dr. Aseem Malhotra just referred to, again, speaking in Parliament on this topic.
And why are the institutions whose job it is to notice these matters, to record these matters, to publicise and call attention to these matters, why are they all apparently asleep at the wheel? And the second burning question, which I'll come to first, is why is no one listening to those raising the alarm? The research and analysis of two of Britain's most trusted doctors provides us with alarming clarity. Only this week, Sir Gary, the director of the Centre of Evidence-Based Medicine at the University of Oxford, Professor Carl Hennigan, reviewed the causes of excess deaths and concludes that they are predominantly related to cardiovascular disease. He told the Sunday Express newspaper, this cannot be explained by COVID, population growth, or an ageing population. Consultant cardiologist Dr. Aseem Malhotra, who is a world-leading expert in the causes of heart disease, also told TNT Radio yesterday that even though cardiovascular disease is multifactorial, the top of the list in the hierarchy of causes behind excess cardiac-related deaths has to be the experimental COVID mRNA vaccine until proven otherwise. And this is not speculative. No. I won't give way at this, but let me just finish this trial and I'll give way to the honourable gentleman. This is not speculative, but based on the highest level of data, which combines plausible biological mechanism, randomised controlled trials, high-quality observational data, pharmacovigilance data, autopsy data, and clinical data. And those who choose not to acknowledge these cold, hard facts, Mr. Sagari, are either unaware of the evidence, willfully blind, or lack a conscience. I'll give way to the Honourable.
Now, that same Dr. Aseem Malhotra, the very public UK cardiologist who's been campaigning on this issue of vaccines, he started off by supporting the COVID vaccines, mind you. It's important to remember that. Then his father tragically passed away, and he had to look into the issue and decided that he believes that these vaccines were responsible for the death of his father, did an about turn, and has been campaigning against them ever since. We played a clip of his last week on the live stream, which we're going to play again because it's on this topic. And so some of you may have seen it from last week, and that is his view that he's been briefed that the entire COVID inquiry looking into this currently that was being heard in the UK Parliament, not those debates you just heard there on questions raised by MP Andrew Bridgen, but the formal COVID inquiry, that, according to Dr. Aseem Malhotra, was postponed by the government until after the elections because they themselves are now running scared that it will reveal that the vaccines and, as I mentioned, other factors such as end-of-life protocols, the use of midazolam with morphine, that these are the factors that have caused the excess death rather than what we were told at the time was this very deadly pandemic. Here's Dr. Aseem Malhotra on that point as to why the COVID inquiry was delayed.
I've now spoken to two former Conservative Party ministers one-on-one. I've had lots of time with both of these people. I won't name them because I want to protect their confidentiality for obvious reasons. But through those conversations, one, there was an acknowledgement that the COVID mRNA vaccines have caused a big problem and are probably a big factor behind the excess deaths. But the second issue, James, is this. One of those ministers said to me, Asim, accepting what I've said, there's a big problem with getting this out before the general election because this essentially may collapse the government. I mean, one of the prides of this particular government has been the rollout of the vaccine. And interestingly, as you know, James, only a few days ago, the BBC reported on the fact that during the COVID inquiry, a decision has been made that any concerns and issues related to the COVID vaccine, specifically with heart issues, is going to only occur after the general election. That tells you everything you need to know.
So this has been kicked into the long grass. And now the reason we suggest to you all that more people aren't raising the alarm bells about what is blatantly obvious in front of our faces as to what's going on here is because they're scared. The professionals that are worried about losing their various medical licenses, permissions, and jobs, the doctors, they all work for the state through one way or the other. And people are being threatened. We mentioned Andrew Bridgen raising these questions in Parliament. Well, one of the other things he raised was the fact that he himself was threatened for raising these topics. Have a look at this from the same conversations, the same interventions by Andrew Bridgen MP in the UK Parliament.
With a senior member of the party who, after listening to my concerns about the vaccines and NG163, the midazolam and morphine scandal, told me quite calmly, Andrew, there is currently no political appetite for your views on the vaccines. There may well be in 20 years' time, and you're probably going to be proven right. But in the meantime, you need to bear in mind, you're taking on the most powerful vested interest in the world, with all the personal risk for you that will entail. So, Gary, I refuse to bow to that threat. And as they say, the rest is history. People have alleged that I'm spouting conspiracy theories. Well, I think it is a conspiracy. It's a conspiracy against the science. It's a conspiracy of silence. And so, Gary, it's a conspiracy against the people. And I will have none of it.
Well, Mr. Bridgen has now, since that debate, which wasn't in government time, put a formal request to Penny Mordaunt in the UK House of Parliament to have a debate in a formally organised government debate during government time to try and have the government ministers respond to questions. As you see here from the post, Andrew Bridgen MP post, I asked Penny Mordaunt if the government would instruct the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency to release the anonymized doses, dates, and deaths data that it holds, which it has already disclosed to AstraZeneca, Pfizer, and Moderna. This is public data that the public seems to have no right to, and data that would very quickly verify whether those experimental COVID-19 vaccines are in fact safe and effective. We'll bring you more on that as Andrew Bridgen manages to secure a debate in the UK House of Parliament on government time to have government ministers now respond to this incredibly worrying rise, remember, worldwide, of global excess deaths. But meanwhile, of course, as you've seen, the pharmaceutical companies and the governments are still seeking to hide this fact. But the victims push on, soldier on, and continue nonetheless. As the Telegraph reports, and you can see there from this headline, 20th of January 2024 in the UK Telegraph, AstraZeneca in £80 million COVID jab compensation claim set to be one of the biggest battles of its kind. This is a case against AstraZeneca. The Telegraph there is reporting it. It's a case brought by those who have been injured after taking or bereaved after taking the vaccine. And here is the post by the UK VIB UK, which is the Vaccine Injured and Bereaved UK group. And in their post, they state very clearly, AstraZeneca in 80 million COVID jab compensation claim set to be one of the biggest battles of its kind. And they quote from the article, lawyers have issued the claims amounting to tens of millions of pounds in the High Court over complications they say were caused by the vaccine months after launching 2 test cases. The cases highlight what is claimed to be a very rare side effect that has been linked to the deaths of at least 81 people and caused serious harm to hundreds more. Sir Jeremy Wright, the former Attorney General, is urging Rishi Sunak, he's the UK PM at the moment, to intervene and settle the cases before they reach court. I wonder why Sir Jeremy Wright, is the former Attorney General, is asking the PM to intervene and settle the case before it reaches court. Again, what do they have to hide? Is it the fact that they don't want disclosure in courts, in a court of law? Is that what they're trying to hide and settle before it gets to court? Again, people are no longer buying the lies. The UK Sunday Times just reported this Sunday gone. On its front page, you can see there the headline: "The legacy of vaccination scares, a third of under 16s at risk of measles." And that's because the MMR rates are plummeting. The measles, mumps, and rubella vaccination rates, those 3 doses they give you in one to babies, the rate is going down. People are becoming put off by vaccines because of the way in which governments around the world coerced us to take them. Don't mince your words, folks, around this topic. Don't say when speaking of this, oh, they pressured us. The correct term for what happened during COVID is we were coerced. People were lost their jobs. People were threatened to lose their jobs. People were pressured by all manner of formal official institutions and departments, telling them that if they didn't have the vaccine, it would affect their careers. This is all coercion. Coercion to be injected by an experimental so-called vaccine, the consequences of which we see now, as we believe, is leading to a global increase in excess death. But again, those same institutions that were behind this, rather than accept the cold, bare facts in the cold light of day, are attempting to hide behind viruses and new viruses as perhaps something causing these deaths. So it's no surprise to us that the World Health Organization decided to release yet another new strain of COVID with which to attempt to blame these excess deaths. And as you see here, this is from the World Health Organization director on Fox News. The headline states, WHO director calls for World Pandemic Treaty to prepare for disease X. Ghebreyesus told the World Economic Forum that he hoped countries would reach a pandemic agreement by May to address this common enemy. That's dated 20th of January 2024. And here is an extract from the article. World Health Organization Director General Tedros Ghebreyesus has called on countries to sign on the Health Organization's pandemic treaty so the world can prepare for disease X. Ghebreyesus, speaking in front of an audience at the World Economic Forum in Davos on Wednesday, said that he hoped countries would reach a pandemic agreement by May to address this, quote, common enemy. Disease X is a hypothetical placeholder, the article continues. Disease X is a hypothetical placeholder virus that has not yet been formed, but scientists say it could be 20 times deadlier than COVID-19. It was added to the WHO's shortlist of pathogens for research in 2017 that could cause a serious international epidemic, according to a 2022 WHO press release. So let's get this straight. Disease X hasn't actually yet been discovered. Nevertheless, they are quicker off the bat to announce that an as of yet undiscovered disease is going to kill many around the world, but they're not interested in discovering what's already killing so many people with the global increase in excess death. What we call that in our game is narrative seeding. That is none other than predictive programming. They've admitted disease X doesn't exist yet, and yet are seeding the narrative that it is going to be responsible for all the excess deaths that they know they will be unable to hide as this trend continues, and because the floodgates are beginning to open and they can't control those floodgates. But we've just demonstrated to you in a way that is not a matter of opinion, but is confirmed by data itself, that there is already a pattern of 10 to 20% global excess death. Disease X hasn't been released yet, and yet we know that they are going to seek to blame that on disease X. Reading one more time from that Fox article, just to emphasize this point, it states, disease X is a hypothetical placeholder virus that has not yet been formed. But scientists say it could be 20 times deadlier than COVID-19. What a clown world we're in. And Zero Hedge, the well-known blog, has recognized this and has published a piece mocking this idea. The headline on Zero Hedge, you can see, states, experts say new COVID strain will cause global heart failure pandemic, in quotation marks. And to read from the Zero Hedge article there, a new strain known as JN.1 will cause many people to suffer from, quote, reduced cardiac function, unquote, according to the report. Japan's top research institute, Rekin, has now issued a warning in the new report, which states that the ACE2 receptors, which the coronavirus clings to within human cells, are very common in the heart, reports GB News. And Zero Hedge continues, even though conclusive clinical evidence that persistent SARS-CoV-2 infection is associated with declined cardiac function has not been reported so far, in other words, the evidence for that has not been reported yet, the proof of concept study of the possibility of SARS-CoV-2 persistent infection of the heart and the potential risk of opportunistic progression of heart failure should be validated by a three-dimensional human cardiac tissue model, which would serve as the alarm bell for the global healthcare risk, states the report. Oh, right, okay, so let's get this straight. Let me read that one more time slowly, yeah? Even though conclusive clinical evidence that persistent SARS-CoV-2 infection is associated with declined cardiac function has not been reported so far. Let me break that sentence down for you. Reading, folks, from the second paragraph, right? It's stating that conclusive clinical evidence that COVID is causing heart problem has not yet been reported. Nevertheless, it states at the end of that paragraph at the bottom, we're still going to run with that conclusion because we've got a three-dimensional human cardiac tissue model, which would serve as the alarm bell for a global healthcare risk. They really think we're stupid. They really, really think we're stupid. And yet they've delayed the formal COVID inquiry. As the Daily Skeptic reports here, the UK COVID vaccine investigation unexpectedly postponed until after the general election. An article there from the 11th of January, 2024. Reading from that article, it states, the long-awaited COVID vaccine inquiry has been postponed for mysterious reasons. According to the BBC, the hearings have been postponed to occur after the general election. It continues, the COVID inquiry will not start hearing evidence about the development of vaccines and other drugs this summer as originally planned. Witness hearings will be postponed until a later date, likely to be after the next general election. Interestingly, it took roughly 11 months to develop, test, and approve COVID-19 vaccines. The UK's own AstraZeneca vaccine development started in February 2020, and the MHRA approved it in December 2020. However, it will take longer than that even to begin the UK COVID vaccine investigation. They are dragging their heels. And it's no wonder that people are beginning to be incredibly suspicious. As we showed you in that clip, people already know that the reason that inquiry has been postponed, the COVID inquiry in the UK, is because it will, in the end, demonstrate a link between vaccines and excess death. And such is the state that even in Scotland, the inquiry is in a shambles as well. We all remember UK PM Boris Johnson being caught deleting his WhatsApp messages, as was revealed in that England inquiry. Well, this is from the Scottish inquiry by Neil Harvey. He's a member of Parliament from Scotland. And he states in his post, the fundamental question on Sturgeon, Nicola Sturgeon, the former Scottish First Minister, on Sturgeon's destruction of COVID information that must be addressed is this: given it is an offence under the Inquiries Act 2005 to fail to preserve or to conceal evidence for an inquiry, what was in those deleted messages that was so important that Sturgeon would rather place herself in legal and reputational jeopardy than have those messages surface? They must be recovered. Neil Harvey MP from Scotland. The Alba Party, revealing, as is dated there, 20th of January 2024, that even in Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon has deleted the messages that would lead to further clarification as to exactly what's going on with the vaccines and the global excess death. Everybody is becoming aware as to what they are trying to hide, and run as they may, people are beginning to wake up around the world. This is a global increase in excess death, and people are beginning to wake up globally. We know, as we saw from last week's live stream in Iowa, Trump absolutely annihilated all internal Republican opposition. And this week, not only did Vivek Ramaswamy step down and endorse Trump after campaigning against him towards the end of his campaign, so did Ron DeSantis, stepping down after having spent most, if not all, of his campaigning against Trump, but now endorsing Trump as well. People are beginning to realize that there's a huge, huge groundswell in the UK, in the US, with Trump in the UK in particular. It will show itself, I believe, during and after this general election coming up this year, which may well lead to a hung parliament scenario with a Labour prime minister, but nevertheless will be a temporary scenario. And what we may end up seeing is, as in the US, Trump surges, the UK may well see a Nigel Farage insurgency, because people are demanding answers, the same as I said around the world. Here is an Australian senator stating very clearly, Malcolm Roberts, that the pandemic was planned and globally coordinated decades in advance. People are beginning to wake up, and they are having none of it. Have a look at this video from that Australian senator, Malcolm Roberts, stating pretty much what we've been stating from the beginning on this topic. This is going to blow up, folks. And people forget vindication. Vindication will come anyway, but we didn't do this work for public applause and recognition. What will come is news will become so undisputable that this is the tragedy that has struck the world since the fake COVID pandemic, that people will be in absolute shock. Have a listen to the Australian senator wax lyrical on this very topic.
People in this country and globally have been steamrolled. It is also clear that it has been coordinated globally. It is also clear that it has been integrated, not just over 6 months, not just over 2.5 years, but it has been planned over decades. The changes to legislation in this country were done so that they could control doctors and people. But the people are waking, and it's thanks to people like Dr. Altman and all the presenters here today, thanks to people like Senator Babette and Craig Kelly. We know and we knew that this is all bullshit and that we've been had. But we are going to hound you down, the people that are guilty. We are going to hound you down and hold you accountable, and we will expose your global agenda so that the people of Australia can be free in the future. Because I love my kids, and I'm looking forward to my grandkids. And we are going to save this country.
So this is a phenomenon around the world, excess deaths. But as you've just heard, people around the world are beginning in various parliaments. Andrew Bridgen in the UK Parliament, Malcolm Roberts, they're a senator in Australia, are beginning to ask these very difficult questions as to what is causing this increase, global increase in excess death. And as we stated at the beginning of today's live stream, we believe you're going to find two main causes, perhaps a periphery third. Of course, the vaccines will be a leading cause in this global 10 to 20% excess death that is worldwide, not just in the UK, not just in the US, but in multiple countries around the world. They all happen to have rolled out the vaccines. The vaccine is one of the causes. And the second one that we've been talking about from the very beginning of this has been the end-of-life protocols. When they said, remember that people they said were tested positive for COVID, they were putting them in the hospitals and care homes on end-of-life protocols that meant putting them on death row drug midazolam combined with morphine, which completely stops the respiratory system and ends up killing them in a state of delirium because they're on morphine. That end-of-life protocol has been banned in the UK under the name the Liverpool Care Pathway, and yet was reintroduced during COVID as NG Guideline Protocol, NHS Protocol NG163. But it's the very same midazolam and morphine combination that was banned under the UK Liverpool Care Pathway, banned because it was found to be killing people. They simply changed the name. Vaccines and end-of-life protocols, midazolam and morphine in the US, remdesivir and morphine, this wasn't just done in the UK, will be found to be the two lead causes of global excess death and periphery. Third one perhaps will be the economic harms and the effects economically and socially of lockdown, leading to poverty-related, circumstance-related death as well. This is all going to come out, folks. The floodgates cannot be closed. This will all be revealed. And we've been attempting consistently on Warrior Creed and Radical Media generally to raise the alarm bells. If you want the receipts for everything presented here in today's live stream, go to Radical Media, maajidnawaz.substack.com, and you'll find all the receipts with all the hyperlinks for you to see and watch these videos yourselves, to get the data yourselves. It will all be there for you because as we always say, don't just trust us for telling you this, follow it and look it up for yourselves. What we really want to make sure nothing like this tragedy is an understatement, but nothing like this can ever happen again, is for all of us, our consciousness to be raised to a point where we're all thinking critically, and that if ever, whether it's disease X or any other excuse, World War III, that they seek to provoke, to stop us all getting to the bottom of what exactly happened between the years 2019 and now, whatever they seek to provoke, if our critical thinking faculties are raised, we will never fall for it again. And that is the hope. That's why we do this, not for public recognition, though vindication, of course, would be nice, as would for some of us who lost our careers and livelihoods, as you can see there. Compensation. I will, as promised, resume my legal case against LBC for their unfair dismissal and cancellation of my warnings on air, being at the time the UK's only national broadcaster on national airwaves to be raising the alarm bells about the COVID scam and indeed the interference in the US 2020 elections. All of this will be revealed. And I wonder what people will do when it is. They will no longer be able to hide by covering their mouths, their noses, and their eyes and their ears. Hear no evil, see no evil, and speak no evil. That is not going to be possible when all of this data is revealed and the floodgates open, which indeed is going to happen. Right, folks, that there is no, as you can see, Usman there to speak, reflect on and give his views on what we presented today. But hopefully, inshallah, he'll be back next week to join us on Warrior Creed. So with that, we'll end it. For the receipts and written version of everything you've heard today in this live stream and in this podcast, go to Radical Media, maajidnawaz.substack.com, in order to see the written version of this article. And other than that, until next week, same time, 3 p.m. UK time, 10 a.m. EST, this has been Warrior Creed. I have been the Radical Maajid Nawaz, and we thank you very much for tuning in, as always.
Now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength. Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.
Damn, that shit was dope.